Want to achieve network marketing success? Then you're in the right company. Hello, and welcome to Leave Nothing to Chance, hosted by networking marketing giant John Solleder. Learn everything you need to know about the network marketing space from somebody who's actually done it. Join us every week for front row seats as we feature some of the finest and most successful personalities in network marketing. Leave nothing to chance. Join us now.
Well, hey, this is part two of a fascinating interview with Jordan Matthews. Jordan is an attorney, as we shared last week. He's been a professional actor. He is the author of a new book coming out called Failure. When you have nothing, you have everything, which is a fascinating title. So, Jordan, thank you for doing part two with me. We have so much information still to go over. That's why I figured we'd do it over 2 weeks. So welcome back to our listeners as well. Most importantly, if you heard last week, and a lot of you, this is kind of like you being in the entertainment field. This is kind of like I've been watching this show called This Is Us that my wife has been making me watch.
Yeah.
And I got addicted to it. And it's coming to the last, 3 or 4 weeks now. And it's like every week, well, what's going to happen next week? So this is what happens when you get old, Jordan,
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's all good.
Anyway, so let's pick up. I mean, you've been involved, and I know it's ongoing. I know that there's not a whole lot you can say about it, but a major suit against Steve Wynn. For those people who don't know Steve Wynn, I mean, one of the largest names in Las Vegas in the resort industry for many, many years. Anything you can share on that? I know it's been in the news media a lot. I've been following the case the last couple of years, but anything that you can share on that, and what kind of experience is that? Let me ask you this as well: what kind of experience is that to walk into a courtroom against a corporation that size, and also an individual that's bigger than life, like Mr. Wynn is?
It's actually interesting because so I'll go into sort of how a bit of it unfolded. One of the interesting things actually was, so obviously I had a career, doing film finance and whatnot for about a decade or so before becoming a lawyer. And so, one of the most important things is psychology, understanding, strategy. It's funny because my kids, I think my daughter said something to me the other week about playing chess. And I said, she asked me, she told me either she had learned to play chess or she wanted to play chess, or could I teach her, something like that. And I actually said to her, I actually have never played chess. I've actually never played chess. But my life and every single thing I do on a day-to-day basis is a chess game. So, for example, the specific point there is that I had really, fortunately, because of my experience in business, I had lawyers who, represent Tiger Woods and represented me, or Kevin Costner and all this other stuff, and had done very large deals and in litigation. And they were great lawyers and still very good colleagues and friends of mine. And I was a very hands-on client. So I was sort of a de facto lawyer, but I couldn't practice because I didn't have a license. And so when I became a lawyer later, one of the things that lawyers typically do when they come onto a case is they'll look the other lawyer up, and one of the first things you do is you check someone's bar number, right? When were you licensed, right? Mm. And I got into this case early on, originated and became lead counsel early on. And so the strategy there is that if someone looked at me, they would have assumed that I was green and that I didn't really know much, because they would assume that I was early. And I was happy with that. That was fine with me, because I knew that my experiences previously, putting together hundreds of millions of dollars of deals, working on multi-billion-dollar deals, doing millions and millions and millions at issue in litigation, very high-paced litigation in the entertainment space, in a very real way, and as a client with very good lawyers, that I had experiences that a lot of other lawyers didn't necessarily have. So I used that as an asset to the extent that I knew that they would not necessarily expect me to pull certain things or do certain things. I knew that they had sophisticated counsel. And of course, what I did was, the first thing I did was I called my mentor, who's been practicing for over 30 years and is a very big lawyer. And I engaged him as co-counsel. So I really did the majority of the work, but I had him there, obviously having a firm and whatnot, but I knew his experience and whatnot, but I had him on board so that he could, be there to say, hey, you should think about this, or, hey, let's, consider this, or let's go in this direction. but really how, and also as from my experience as an actor and training in theater in New York, I also, when I went to law school, I would do trial competitions and I would generally win or get very high placed, because walking into a room and being able to sort of present and be present to what was going on was something that I had been really, adamantly trained to do. I was trained at the Stella Adler Conservatory, and they were known for training Marlon Brando. There was I understood how to drop into a moment. And so if I was going to go into court, and get ready for argument, or if I ended up arguing the Ninth Circuit, which I've argued in the Ninth Circuit against, them, not only was I prepped, I knew I would know every detail, every record. I wrote everything. I would be able to cite page 26, line 27, footnote 3 says X, Y, Z, if you want to reference this. But so I was comfortable going into a courtroom for an argument if I had to fly in and do that. Because of the prior experiences in life, it was totally fine doing it. I can't go into too much detail because it's an ongoing matter, but really how it originated was obviously after Harvey Weinstein, sort of that was the dam breaking, as everyone kind of knows, with the sort of Me Too issue that happened with Weinstein. Steve Wynn was the first executive or first CEO of a public company that experienced those accusations. And that was part of a report that the Wall Street Journal published in January of 2018. It was basically a bombshell report. At the time, he was also chairman of the Republican Finance Committee. And so it was a big hit right away. And he had to step down as chairman of Wynn Resorts, step down as chairman of the Republican Finance Committee immediately. It emanated from a settlement. There was a $7.5 million settlement that he had entered into with a woman back in 2005 that alleged that he had raped her. That's what the allegation was, and he denied that. But nevertheless, that settlement came up, and there was a lot of other reports that he had engaged in misconduct. He denies these allegations, but these were the allegations that came out as a part of that report. And the client in this case was actually the main person who actually reported that incident and was immediately basically thrown out of the hotel and blacklisted. And so it was sort of the central premise of that Wall Street Journal report that came out. In the middle of it, there's a lot of things that happened because they were in the middle of a $2.6 billion casino that they were opening in Boston, the Encore Boston Harbor, that was at risk. It triggered investigations by the Nevada Gaming Commission and the Massachusetts Gaming Commission that went into a year of very intensive investigations. And we initiated suit, and it started in Nevada District Court, ended up going to the Ninth Circuit, Nevada State Court, California Central District Federal Court, in the Ninth Circuit. Again, I've been up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's been there's so many things and a lot of depth I'd probably need to go into at a later point. But that's the general background of what that's been about.
So let's talk about some more fun stuff than lawsuits. I know you do that. That's your day job, but
yeah.
I know writing is something that you brought up, that you've started to do now, and you've got your first book coming out. And I want to talk about that. But before I do, so I don't get in trouble with my wife, because I got to pay some bills on these shows, okay? And I want to mention this, and it's a perfect segue because you're on the show. So yeah. I've written 4 books, and the third one was called Moving Up 2020. And Moving Up 2020 was written in 2019, right? Like, who knew what was going to happen in 2020? I'll never forget coming up with the title in 2019, thinking, hey, 2020, wow, what a great title, Moving Up 2020. And then, of course, we know what happened with the world, right? Unfortunately. Yeah. But in this book, and of course, my books are all, reference network marketing and things in the network marketing space. But there's a lady in this book named Arlene Lowy that I wrote about on page 73. You may have heard of her.
I have.
There's, of course, you can't see all of that. Yeah. And then I wrote another book that came out in 2021 called Leave Nothing to Chance. And by the way, these have been Amazon bestsellers and 6 different categories, small business, all sorts of things when they came out. And here's another story about this same lady, Arlene Lowy, on an entire chapter about her, actually, on page 182. I'm gonna get my eyes checked. So anyway, these books are available on Amazon in Spanish, English, digital, et cetera, et cetera. And during the writing process, I talked to your mom quite a bit. And Jordy's mom, because a lot of our audience, I'm sorry, I'm calling you Jordy. I'm
I love
gonna
it.
get Jordan now.
Oh, there it came
That's
out.
the problem. That's the problem when I know you since you're 4. And I'm getting old. It's almost 10 o'clock and it's almost past my bedtime. But in talking to her back then, your mom has been an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur for as long as I know her, which is well over 30 years. And what was it like? Because a lot of our audience, of course, is network marketing people.
Yep.
And some of our audience, network marketing people, they dabble in small business as well. They're in real estate, they're in insurance, they're real estate investors. They're entrepreneurial people. What was it like being raised by an entrepreneurial mom, and how did that help you? We talked about your dad in show 1, but how did mom help you in part 2?
Unbelievable. I think about. I texted her the other day. I think it was actually maybe yesterday or the day before, and I just told her, I've called her a lot more recently and told her how much not only how much I appreciate her. It's kind of an unfortunate thing that it takes, going through life and getting older to get to a place where you really understand and appreciate someone. That was a process of osmosis, and I was so fortunate because I remember, just sort of like yourself, I remember her working her way up to the top of a company, and especially, as a mother, as a woman in the 90s, I imagine, she had her own challenges, probably, more difficult than it would be today, perhaps. I don't really know, but she would work herself up to the top of the company, be a number 1 or whatever, and then get knocked out, right? And then rebuild. She would, I remember her going down and basically sleeping on people's couches in West Virginia. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She'd do that for years. I actually would get frustrated with her at times as I got older, because it was amazing to me. She would call me, and after investing so much of her energy and her money into, someone that she thought was going to be, a big hitter, or someone that she thought was going to be, what she called a go now person, they would fall apart after 2 years or something. And then she would tell me she just had a meeting with someone. Finally, someone actually showed up as opposed to not showing up. And she just thinks that they're going to be the next thing. And she would start driving down that lane for another, get ready for another year or 2 or whatever. And I was just like, I've heard this story from you so many times. I would get frustrated with it. I'd be like, I've heard, how many times are you going to tell me about this person who didn't work out? And it basically, I started to realize that was not only something that was my experience, but it was something that was drilled into me, that tenacity and persistence. She was blind to the idea of something not working out. It didn't work out, and then she was just on to the next thing. And so, not only that, but she's just an amazingly, as just an incredibly giving, thoughtful, loving person. She's always been my number 1 fan. She is, the most loving, wonderful person to me. She's an incredible mother, an incredible teacher, and an amazing. What's so interesting to me about her, though, is I often have these conversations with her where I'm like, Mom, you're so sweet. She's so sweet. She's so thoughtful, and she's so sweet in many ways. But at the same time, she's just a bull of a person that you wouldn't necessarily expect. She's unassuming, smaller woman. She's a normal woman, at this point she's, a little bit older, but she is just persistent. She is, she had things. I remember we even had things in our house, these little things that seem silly, but it was like, I forget what those things are called, like these posters of like the water, and it'll have like a saying under it, like, one drip, creates, an ocean. I don't know. It could be some Eastern
Yeah.
saying or whatever, all these mindset things that were kind of around. And what she really taught me was, I grew up believing that I could achieve whatever I wanted to achieve. So there was no question. If someone told me no, I won't say it here, but it was just like, screw off. Like, I don't really care. Like, and not only that, actually, I got to the point of whether it was even family members. If you told me, it's interesting. I had a couple experiences where, and I'll openly say this. I remember a cousin of mine, and he was, big, personal trainer in Hollywood, a lot of celebrities and all this other stuff, whatever. I don't really care about that. But he's a good guy, and I guess in his own respect. But when I first moved out here and I lost my father, I kind of ended up going to different things that he would do. He would have he would go down to Muscle Beach in Venice or whatever and have like some sort of show or something like that. And honestly, maybe I was going through whatever I was going through at that time with my father, and this is all relative to my mother, because it's her loyalty and the fact that she shows up is such a big character trait for her. I didn't really feel like I was welcomed by my own family. And I remember after about 6 months of being out in Los Angeles, I was super green, and I felt like I'd been out here for a long time. And I emailed my cousin. I had a couple relationships family wise, and I had a chip on my shoulder. I didn't want anyone to give me anything, but I was hitting one wall after another. And she was a big executive at Warner Brothers. And so I asked her, I said, it's a very personal story. She probably doesn't even know this, but that's fine. I remember we set a lunch over at the private dining hall or whatever at Warner Brothers. And I came over, and I went into her office, went into the lot, parked my car, got a pass and all that stuff, went into her building. And she was at the main building. There was basically 12 people who were running Warner Brothers at the time of the corporate offices. And she was executive vice president, corporate communications. She handled all the corporate communications. I think Time Warner owned Warner's at the time. And I get it with her job. Who knows what she was dealing with and what she was used to. But she kind of came out of her office, and I don't remember a very warm feeling. And we walked out of her building and walked over to across this area where there was this dining area building. We go in there. I don't think there's really anyone there. It's a private thing and all that stuff. And I sit down with her, and she looked at me, and this was my cousin through marriage. I had seen her at family events and stuff like that. But she looked at me, and we knew each other. And she said, "What do you want?"
Wow.
And I will never forget that. And I knew what I wanted. I was thinking, well, what I was thinking was, I said, I want can you please open the door for me? Can you introduce me to someone or whatever? That's what I was thinking. And I paused for a moment, and I didn't say that. I said, and I meant it, but I said, we've seen each other at family events. I've just moved out here. I don't really have much family around here. And I honestly just wanted to get to know you a little bit better. And her guard dropped immediately. And we proceeded to have this 2-hour conversation, really great conversation and all this other stuff. And really nice. Finish up. She proceeds to walk me back over to her office and introduces me to every major Warner's executive there. And I walked out of that building, and I said to myself, F off. I'll never talk to you again. And I meant it. And the reason why was because of those words. What do you want? And to me, after having lost my father and after everything else and the way that I approach things, and I've never talked to her since. And that was probably 14, 15 years ago. I think her husband, who's my actual cousin, has tried to reach out and set dinners and all kinds of stuff over years when his brother, who's my cousin, also has come out. And I've turned down every chance of it. There were a lot of other things when I would go there, and I felt like it was kind of he was very focused on himself. The point is, family to me is not someone who's my blood. Family to me is someone who shows up
Mhm.
And that was a big part of my mother. Obviously she's my blood, but I saw her being someone who was a very big giver, showed up for people, and that's a big part of how I do business. I really focus on building authentic relationships with people, thinking about what is important to another person, being a person who really cares, who will show up for someone if it's not in my best interest, but will do, what I believe is the right thing. And I think, you know, there was such a, subconscious, or whatever you want to call it, influence in my life from her, in terms of just the persistence and the tenacity, but in just the little things, the really caring about other people and really showing up, that human component, um, building that actual relationship with another person, where you're, at that personal relationship, is I think crucial to anything you do in life. And I think that people, you hear this all the time, and I really hate this. And I'm okay using that word hate, but like, I don't like the word sales or sell. I don't like to sell anything, because I don't want to put on a show. It's just like, it is what it is. But they say, people are buying you, or you're selling yourself and all that stuff. And, through my own process, I guess I learned it was so much easier to just be honest and just be truthful, authentic. I don't have to remember my story. It just is what it is. And I think that people do, for lack of a better term, they may appreciate that, because they realize that there's on an intrinsic level, on a subconscious level, they realize that you're not playing a game. Yeah, I might be understanding how a game works. And so if I'm in litigation, I can understand what moves I need to make. But that's separate from, you know, really, I think, drilling down into what really is important. So those are a lot of lessons I learned from her.
Well, of course, I know your family. I knew your grandfather. I knew your grandmother. I know your uncles. I know your whole
Yeah.
family, or your whole Pittsburgh family, anyway.
Yep.
And you come from such a amazing group of people. Tell me if I'm right on this. Your grandfather, your mom's dad,
Yeah.
was a Mayo Clinic physician
Mm-hmm.
when he met your grandmother, who I believe
Right.
was a nurse, if I got that right, if I remember right.
Yep.
And of course, he had served. Your mother was born, if I remember right, in the Mariana Islands, I think it was, during World War II.
I actually, that's a good question. I know that she was there. They went to Saipan, I think, and they were
Yeah,
there for some time. Yeah.
because your grandfather was a army doctor for a while,
Right. I believe so. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then his father was a famous chemist, I believe it was, who has a room named for him at, is it the University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon? I always forget what school it is.
So there's the Lowy room, which my mother's, it's Arlene Lowy. So the Lowy room is in the University of Pittsburgh. I guess he worked for the government at the time, so he didn't get the proceeds from it, but he created the patent for the grenade, tear gas. I think he's like 16 different patents. So he was from what I understand, a very, brilliant guy. And on my father's side as well, I mean, there was a lot of that. My grandfather, my father's father was a really brilliant psychiatrist. And I think most of the people in my family on both sides it was probably generational, because that's the thing. When you came to this country,
Mhm.
their parents wanted them to get an education. You became a doctor. So a lot of them became doctors. Yeah.
Where you stand on the shoulders of a lot of great people. Um,
Definitely.
so let's talk about your book
Sure.
coming out in October.
Yeah. So there was a lot of, it was interesting, because it was going to come out, I think, this May. And I got delayed with my publisher, not because it was really kind of a decision. I had, I deal with enough emergencies that come up every day that it just got to a point where my schedule was what it was. And so I moved it to the fall, and it could have still come out. We still could have scheduled it earlier, but I all of a sudden had this sort of another epiphany. And I realized that October 9th was the 19th anniversary of my father's passing when I was 19. And so the publishing date is that day, is October 9th of 2022. So,
And now let's go through the basic stuff.
yeah.
Okay. What three things, when all these great folks listening to us listen to the show and they say, I've got to get Jordan Matthews' book, what three things minimally will they walk away with when they're done reading it?
So there's a couple things. I don't know if I'll hit 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever it might be, but I think specifically. So look, I mean, the book is called Failure When You Have Nothing, You Have Everything. And it really speaks to that. These are very specific stories that go into my own personal loss of my father, his struggle with alcoholism, my taking care of him dying, and the stories of taking care of him when he was relapsing and in and out of jail, and yet through all of that experience and his, in his way, he gave me such a gift, because he really, in my view, left and passed away to let me free to live my life and really take steps. The crucial point is really when you are at a point, there's a philosophy to this. When you are at a point where I think there is such a gift in loss. I use the term, or I don't know if I can't take credit for it. I don't know, but I have had these experiences with forced loss, when it's like, it's almost like, whether it's the universe or whatever it is, just creating a situation where trauma and catastrophe happens. The amazing thing is what you realize you can actually do in those moments. When you lose all of the things around you, or perceptively all of the things around you, you become lethal, because everyone else is attached to something. Everyone else is afraid of losing their job. Everyone else is afraid of losing a client. Everyone is afraid of is someone going to find out who I really am? When you operate in a truly fearless way, I think it's not only magnetic, but the things that you can do if you're willing to handle discomfort and pain are phenomenal. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I mean, the actual stories are very real stories, incredible. I say that humbly, but the things that have gone on in terms of, putting together $600 million in financing as a 26, 27-year-old and working on multi-billion-dollar deals. I don't really care much about the numbers. That was actually part of it, was the belief that I knew that I could do it when so many people doubted me. And even when I was proving it, people would doubt me and people would try to take me out. And the amount of that actually is such a big part of it. People constantly have this belief that everything is supposed to just be okay. I've learned that the bigger you hit, the hard, it's like that saying that you can know the strength of someone by the size of their enemies. I've always looked at that as a stronghold for myself. I want to take on the biggest thing because I'm testing myself. I'm seeing what can I do, and that's a big part of it. But there's another element, if you're sort of talking about a third thing, is there is a philosophical, spiritual base for that. You and I were talking actually about earlier on, kind of offline, we were talking about, I think that we call it the Winhoff method. I ended up getting really into meditation. I ended up getting really into breath work and really oxygenating my mind in a way that kind of resets yourself. And I do cold showers every day. I do, cold plunges. I do all of that stuff, because it's a shock to your system. It's a shock to your physiological system. And when you actually experience it, not only do you have a physiological experience with endorphins, with dopamine, you just rebuild your cells. I mean, it's a proven scientific thing. This is why top athletes do this, because you recover so much quicker. And I was talking to you earlier about I will often, I will douse my head in cold water. That's a big part of it, in my face, because my brain thinks quicker. Like the synapses click quicker. It's not something that I own. I don't own the technology to that, but there is a technological experience to that. Um, and it's also just like, and it goes back to that shock. That shock. It's like if you start your day that way, or even if you end your day that way, whatever it is, it actually helps your sleep. You become lethal, for lack of a better term. Your ability to see through failure, your ability to not care at all what anyone does or doesn't do, is what is when you realize that you don't need anything, when you realize that you don't need any single person, meaning I love people. I love people. I love all that stuff. But when you attach yourself to people, when you attach yourself to things, I don't want to lose my car. I don't want to lose my house. I'm not suggesting, go out there and be reckless. There's a big distinction, and that's probably the wisdom that I guess I've gained at some point. There was a time where I don't know if I was reckless, but I was willing to wreck myself more as a younger person without kids. And unfortunately, I think you got to go through that. I often say to myself, I'm like, God, I think every parent does. I wish that I could give my kids what I know, because I don't know that you can get this knowledge without going through the experience, or the wisdom without going through the experience. But I am also scared, and I'm not scared of really much of anything. But I mean, for them, I realize, I'm like, man, if they have to go through what I had to go through, I'm concerned if they're going to survive it, but I go back to, as a parent, it's from a parenting perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a business perspective. My main goal as a parent is to teach my kids how to fail. I don't care about whether they win. I don't care about whether, they will win at life if they can learn how to lose, if they can learn how to fail, if they can learn how to break, and if they're willing to break. I think the biggest problem is that most people are not willing to break. They will either never start because of the complete failure of breaking, or they will go up to the line and they will never cross it, because what if I lose? And that's just not the way that you're ever going to get anything. You will live a mediocre existence if that's how you live life. And I think that that's just a reality. So that's really, a large crux of what the book is about.
Well, I can't wait to read it, and I couldn't agree more. And failure. It's funny that you say that, and I'll give you three points on that. Listening to what you're talking about. Number one is I read a book a number of years ago called "What Failure Taught Me About Winning."
Mhm.
And I made the title wrong. It's been a while ago, but it's in this one of the 10,000 books on my bookshelves. And it was by Fran Tarkenton, who was a quarterback back before you were born. But when I was young, he was a quarterback for the Vikings. I went to 4 Super Bowls, lost all 4.
Yep.
And I met Fran a couple of times through business many years ago. And but to that point, and to the point you're making, hey, he didn't look at it like it was the end of the road. I lost a ball game, big deal. Guys became a major entrepreneur, was an entrepreneur throughout his career, and even before he got into the NFL. And I remember reading that, and then when I met him, I had this similar conversation what we're having right now, and I don't want to take a lot of time on it because I want to focus on your book and the launch of it. But failure teaches us so much if we're willing to learn from it and be empathetic towards it rather than pathetic towards it. Right?
Yep.
Oh, I lost. Okay, hey, that's life, man. Tom Brady loses.
Yep.
LeBron James loses. Magic Johnson lost. Dan Gable lost. Okay.
Yep.
Well, some of the greatest winners in history lost. Abraham Lincoln lost every election until he became president. Right? And these people go down in history because they got past it, to your point. And that's what your book's going to do, is help people. Second thing on that is on failure is my son right now is at a crossroads in his life. About to graduate high school in a few weeks.
Yep.
Supposed to start college in the fall, go for business school, play hockey, do, what I want him to do, right? Go to school, get the business degree, play hockey, learn the family business, okay, which he'll eventually inherit part of with his sisters.
Yeah.
And he loves cars.
Yeah.
He's a car guy.
Yep.
And so he's debating, well, do I go to trade school instead or do I go to trade school after? And we're designing his life. And I keep saying to him, I tell him about a guy who was a neighbor of mine in New Jersey growing up. And this guy was you would see him down the street. He'd be smoking a cigarette. He'd be underneath his car hood all times of the day, night, wind blowing, snow blowing. He'd be out there with the cars. Anyway, long story short, his name was Frank Reich, and he developed a product called Tough Oil. And product's still out there. I imagine Mr. Reich must be dead by now. And I would tell my son about how he used to take us in his Piper Cub airplane down around the World Trade Center. We'd fly from Teterboro Airport down around the Trade Center and come back. And anyway, but Mr. Reich told me one time, I was about to graduate high school, and I went down the street to talk to him because his son had told me that their company had just gotten very, very successful. And they had gotten a big offer that they rejected. Anyway, long story short, I remember saying to him, how did you get successful? And he was under the car hood and he's all dirty. And he looks up at me and he says, I wasn't afraid to fail. When everybody told me, oh, you're going to fail or you're going to go bankrupt, he goes, I didn't care. Yep. I just said, I focused on what I want to do. And to your point, I'll make it happen. And eventually he did in a very big way. But then the third thing about failure is that I've found in my life and my career is, boy, you got to learn from those failures, know. And sometimes those failures are things like we talked about earlier. You mentioned Wim Hof, who you and I share that Wim Hof passion of biohacking and all of that. But look what Wim did, right? He took his very negative, tremendously sad experience of his wife ending her life prematurely, leaving him with 4 kids, raised his kids, has built a business around the world. And now that business is helping tens of thousands of people that are going through trauma, which we've talked about and you've experienced in your life, not only with your dad's passing, but with some of these circumstances financially and losing everything and coming back. Final question for you. When you look at this book, it's the first, and by the way, I got to tell you, knowing your mom and knowing the writing process, I'm going to tell you, you wrote the first book, it won't be the last book.
Oh yeah, I already have,
good.
Yeah, I have them teed up.
It's kind of like guys who have boats, right? That they, the best 2 days, the day the guy buys the boat, and the guy sells the boat, right? The writing process, because I'm going through it right now, wrestling with another topic I want to write about. But yeah, you got to go through it where you go, oh God, when it's over, I'm never doing that again. How did I do that?
Yeah.
This book's going to bless a lot of people because your story is unique. It's genuine. You've overcome such a tremendous amount and you've gotten through it time and time again. And I'll give you a perfect metaphor, especially with you being in the entertainment world.
Sure.
Rocky 1 comes out 1977, I think it was. And I don't know if you remember in the movie, but in round 14, Rocky's getting pounded. Mm-hmm. Gets knocked down 3 times. And the third time he gets knocked down, Burgess Meredith is his manager. And, he says, just stay down, stay down, stay down. Mm-hmm. And he fights his way up, pulls himself up on the ropes. And even Apollo looks across the ring like, you got to be kidding, buddy. Like, stay down, I'm killing you. And he gets up. Point being, right? It's not how many times we get knocked down. It's how many times we get back up.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, my thought is, first of all, I love taking a hit. I literally look for it. I love taking a hit. At this point, it is an edge that I look for because I feel like every single time I do, it is something that actually makes me tougher. There's 2 points that I would think of. Number one, speaking of that Rocky moment, you and I were talking about this before, but I think it was the last Rocky that before they moved on to like Creed or whatever. And I remember we were having this conversation offline the other week, but it's that one scene where he's fighting an exhibition fight. He's an older guy, and his son, Rocky's has this restaurant. His son comes in and asks him to come outside so they can have a conversation. And I'm not going to go through the whole dialogue, but basically his son is saying, you can you not fight? And he's like, Rocky's like, I think I have to, but he's like, can you not do it? Because I basically always lived in your shadow. And then the moment that I start to get something for myself, I start to get a job where people start respecting me. You do this, and now everyone's like looking at you like, they're making fun of you, and now they're making fun of me or whatever. And Rocky pauses, and he's like, he starts getting into this kind of introspective moment. He's like, he holds up his hand like he's holding a baby. He's like, I remember when I was looking at you, or when you were a baby, and I used to hold you in my hand, and I used to say, you're going to be the best man ever. You're going to do all these things. And he's like, and you went and did all this stuff, but somewhere along the way, you started caring about what people thought, and then he goes into, that saying, he says it much better, more dramatically, but, it's not how much or how hard you can hit. It is how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The fact, like, taking a hit and moving forward is so much more powerful. I look for that. And that also goes back to, it's having the right teachers and having the right people around you. I will tell you, I look, these things, I never speak, by the way. I've entered into rooms, I've done huge deals, I've worked on huge things. I've never, ever in my life thought that I didn't deserve to be in the room. I've never looked at anyone and thought to myself, I'm impressed by who I'm in the room with. I might be impressed from, I'm interested in you. I'm interested in what you've done, but never am I intimidated or thinking that you've done something and I'm not at the same caliber or anything like that. And I don't mean egotistically. I mean that I consider my ability, I'm like, I know what I can do and I know what I've achieved and whatnot. But to that point, I remember even like, I think it was, Schwarzenegger's, his documentary, in the 70s or whenever he did it, when he was going for the 7th Mr. Olympia title. I also remember how he talked about how he would train, and it was either in his book or that documentary, how it talked about he would push himself. He would put so much weight on a rack that he would literally pass out. He would literally pass out and wake up about 5 minutes later. And the way that he was able to grow stronger, obviously there's a lot of sculpting and all that stuff that goes into it, but was because he was willing to pass out. He was willing to put himself in a situation where he would literally physically just collapse and then he would come back. And so, the takeaway really is you have to be really, really willing to be uncomfortable. And I think the last point of that is, I think there's a lot of confusion in the world. There's a lot of confusion where people will say, they're always seeking comfort. Let me go to this resort. Hey, let me call my therapist. Therapists are great and all that stuff. That's fine. But there's a lie in life, which is that life is supposed to be a certain way. You hear people say that. I'm frustrated. I'm upset because it was supposed to go this way. This was supposed to happen. That was supposed to happen, whatever. That's not only a bunch of BS, because it is a bunch of BS. There's no supposed to or whatever. What's going to happen is what's going to happen. It's like a wave. You're going to get hit with one wave after another. And I said this to someone the other day. I said, part of my training, part of my experience is, learning how to surf like an 80-foot wave, because it may take 20 years to learn how to hold balance when you're in a situation that could totally take you out, and how to actually be in a situation like that where you're not panicking and you're not flipping out or whatever. It is a way of life to understand that the very natural, normal way to live life, the normal biological experience of life is discomfort. You can look at Darwinism, you can look at natural selection. I talk to people about like biology and cellular mitosis. You put pressure on something and cells divide. You either die or you survive. You adapt or overcome. It's the same concept of, people in the Marines or the military. You adapt, and that's what life is. And when you have a mentality of learning how to adapt to whatever is in front of you, that's when you can achieve things with a very clear mind and a clear, focus, and you can achieve whatever you want.
Well, you know what? You are testament to that. Okay, you're not even 40 yet, and you've already done some amazing things in your law career, in your entertainment career, in your academic career. You got a great young family, and I know how proud your mom is. I know your dad's looking down from heaven. Okay, I know he's proud of you. I know I'm proud of you. I know your grandpa certainly would have been if he was here.
Yeah.
And I know your whole family is, and it's amazing what you've done. Just keep doing it, because this country and this world needs leadership like
I agree.
never, maybe never before. I didn't live through the Civil War. I'm not that old, and I did live partially through the Vietnam War, but I was pretty young even when that ended. But with what this country and what this world's gone through the last few years, we need leadership. We need clear leadership of people who have a work ethic, who have clarity of purpose, and who are willing to take a punch and say, okay, it is what it is. Let me get up and let me keep going. And that's you, my friend.
Thank
So,
you. It's we're all in this together. I mean that in a it's a silly, sort of thought, but I mean it look, I mean it's certainly not about myself. I appreciate that. It is definitely more about the message that and that's really, I think, the driving force between what this is for me, is saying, okay, I've had these experiences. I appreciate a lot of people have their experiences, but I also realize that everyone's got their own story. Use that story as a strength and as a tool, and it's a gift if you learn how to use it the right way.
well, I can't wait to read this book. I know our listeners can't wait to read this book. And what I'm thinking is, hey, once the book gets launched, let's come back and kind of do a recap of it, because you're going to go through a lot of different steps launching it and a lot of different scenarios. So I'm looking forward to it, my friend. So this is Jordan Matthews. This is an amazing story, and this book is going to be life changing. I can tell already it's going to be life changing. You're going to want to read it, folks. So, Jordan, I'm going to give you the last word tonight.
Thanks. I appreciate that. This is, life is definitely a journey. My life is not perfect. No one's is by any means. We all have experiences, and I continue to have experiences every day that are trying and challenging, but it's waking up. I think the other day I was getting up and I felt very crushed. I was feeling depressed a couple days ago. I've had a couple of those experiences recently, and I don't get depressed, but that's actually a good sign for me. I felt when I was actually experiencing that, I was like, this is a good sign for me. This means I'm experiencing whatever the hell I'm experiencing, and I'm pushing up against the line, and I know that the other side of that is me getting stronger, me having to make decisions. I think the biggest thing in life, as a sort of a final thought, is we all have expectations. As human beings, we want to get some level of certainty in our lives. And the challenge is that certainty becomes very comfortable. But the only thing that's certain is that certainty is going to change. I know that I don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but I do want to live my life fully. And to the extent that other people are doing that as well, that's really the purpose, and that's the message.
Great. Thanks again.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Leave Nothing to Chance. If you want to know more about what it takes to succeed in the network marketing space, join us again next week for another amazing episode. For additional resources and to connect with John Solleder, visit leavingnothingtochance.com. Don't forget to leave a review, and we'll see you next time.